Hi, my name is Eric Gardner, and I'm giving you a presentation on intellectual disabilities as researched by me. So, the ODEA defines an intellectual disability as significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning and includes a student whose intelligence test score is 2 or more standard deviations below the norm on a standardized individual intelligence test. This means that their IQ that they were tested for is at or below 70, and so they're considered to have an intellectual disability. This must exist concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior and manifest during the developmental period, which means earlier than the age of 18, and it must adversely affect a child's educational performance. So there are four levels of intellectual disability. Mild, which means they have learning difficulties, but are able to work, maintain good social relationships, and contribute to society. Then there's moderate, which means there's a marked delay during childhood. They need some degree of independence and self-care, um, and they have adequate communication skills and academic skills, but they will require some varying degree of support to live and work within the community. Then there's severe, which has a continuous need of support in all aspects of living, and then profound, which has severe limitations in self-care, continence, communication, and mobility, and will need continuous support throughout their whole entire life. So here are some questions that you all had about intellectual disabilities. Hopefully through the course of this presentation, I might be able to answer them for you. We will be coming back to them when we reach the end, and I will answer them one by one. But first, let me briefly describe the characteristics of an intellectual disability. The first characteristic is problems with cognition. This is both short-term memory and long-term memory impairment. For short-term memory, they struggle with the proper sequence of events. This means that when you are teaching them a specific lesson or, say, an algorithm in math, it has specific steps to follow. When they go to perform it for themselves, they may get those steps mixed up and have trouble keeping track of what comes next. For the long-term memory impairment, the remembering of information is either not having enough detail, or they're too slow to recall the information, or they just have it stored ineffectively in their brain. So these problems with cognition affect the act of learning new skills, storing and retrieving information from memory, and transferring this knowledge to new or slightly different situations or concepts. Teachers can use memory strategies to help compensate for this impairment, such as using picture notebooks filled out by the students that lay out a sequence of steps or elements of a job that need to be done, or a checklist of things to accomplish and when to accomplish it by. The second characteristic is um, problems with adaptive behavior. So adaptive behaviors are skills that a person develops in response to social and community expectations. These are behaviors that are necessary for individuals to function in society. This includes conceptual skills such as communication, self-direction, and functional academics. Um, Also, social and leisure skills, such as interacting with others and understanding societal norms. And finally, practical skills, such as self-care, home and school living, work, health, and safety. So some strategies to assist in the development of adaptive behavior include explicit systematic instruction, in which teachers model tasks and provide extensive feedback uh, to students through multiple opportunities, and provide students multiple opportunities to practice and respond. So the two main aspects of this is extensive feedback and multiple opportunities to practice. these are very important when you're trying to help somebody um, solidify a pattern or get something in their memory correctly. And then the second one is additional supports. So supports are can be in the categories of natural, which are family, friends, and neighbors; non-paid, which are community clubs, recreational leagues, or private organizations; the generic, which is state services; and then there's the specialized, which are special ed, early intervention, or vocabulary rehabilitation. So the third and final characteristic of an intellectual is um, the need for the need for support to sustain their independence. So this is kind of like a balance between the need for life skills versus the need for general education. Sometimes it's necessary for students to receive a separate curriculum that targets life skills needed to manage at home, job, or engage in activities within the community. These students may need to have reduced access to general education, and by proxy, that would reduce access to their peers and classmates. This is why it is so important to have supports when it comes to social aspects of intellectual disability. Friendships are a natural support system and an excellent source for social interaction. These social interactions develop understanding around societal norms and how the individual operates within the community. Next, we will discuss the process for evaluation and eligibility when assessing an intellectual disability according to the Oregon Department of Education. So if a child is suspected of having an intellectual disability, the following evaluations must be conducted. The first one is an intelligence test. This is an IQ test administered by a credible source meeting APA standards of reliability and validity. It must be administered by a state board psychologist or an individual assigned by the school district who has training in administering and interpreting the test. The second one is an adaptive behavior scale, where the adaptive behavior is assessed through interviews and scale ratings provided by parents, caregivers, and teachers. Third is a medical or health assessment statement. This may include any medical documents that give sensory or physical reasoning outside of an intellectual disability that may also be affecting your child's education. And then finally, a developmental history, which basically documents the development of your child from birth to recent. Moving forward, the eligibility criteria. To be eligible as a child with an intellectual disability, the child must meet all of the following minimum criteria, and these are all related to the evaluations that we just had. So the child's intelligence score is 2 or more standard deviations below the mean. That means it is 70 or below. The child has deficits and adaptive behavior coexistent with the child's impairment in intellectual functioning. The child's developmental level or educational achievement is significantly below the age or grade norms. And then the child's developmental or educational problems primarily are not primarily the result of sensory disabilities or other physical factors. So that's where the medical and health assessment came in. If there was comorbidities or something, that's where you would find out. So if that wasn't clear enough, here is a video that may help clarify a little better the eligibility criteria. So when your child has been diagnosed with an intellectual disability, it may seem overwhelming, but there are accommodations that can be used to make sure your child receives the quality education experience they deserve. So there are four different areas of accommodation I wish to discuss. The first being presentation accommodations. These allow students to access instructional material that does not require them to, per se, read standard print presented in a standard visual format. Uh, Black print, white paper, um, kind of thing that we do in classrooms. So some examples of this accommodation would be verbal instructions, or the repetition of instructions multiple different ways through multiple different medias, or in multiple different educational formats, as music, or math, or writing, or science. Um, Others would be large print, fewer items per page, or some visual prompts or cues. Examples further being like arrows pointing on a page, or like the stars, or like the burst, like big graphics around the information. So the next would be response accommodations. These allow students alternatives for completion of activities, assignments, and tests. Students may be permitted to demonstrate their knowledge and skills in alternate ways, or to solve or organize their work using an electronic device or organizer. Some examples are marking answers in a test book instead of on a answer sheet, to be able to dictate their responses into an audio recorder, or a live scribe pen, or to point to response choices, say if you had a response bank, or to type the response on a assistive technology keyboard. So the after response accommodations, we have setting accommodations. So setting accommodations change the location in which a test or an assignment is given, or the conditions of the assessment setting. So like you can have individuals or small groups. You can reduce distraction with like the use of private space, or a separate classroom. You can, this also ties into the distraction-free setting. And then you can also use alternative furniture, such as like bean bags, or like arranging the room in a specific way, such as stations. And then further, we have accommodations, scheduling accommodations, which, as it sounds, change the length of time allowed for completion of tests, projects, assignments, and may also change the way time is organized, meaning the way you break in the classroom. So we have flexible scheduling, which is like um, breaking something up into several sessions, or versus one session. So like an extended time for tests or assignments, or allowing more frequent breaks, get up, stand up, walk around, or changing the order in which the tasks are handled. So, further aspects of assistance, which of the likes I mentioned earlier are the specific types of supports for students with intellectual disabilities. So let's take a look at the type of supports. So the primary goal of supports is to help the person meet the demands of life's various contexts. They are offered in four intensity levels: intermittent, limited, extensive, and pervasive. Further, there are different types of supports, which we talked about earlier, such as natural supports, which are the individual's own resources. family, friends, neighbors, and as well as coworkers on the job or peers at school. So the non-paid support, such as neighborhood community clubs, recreational leagues, or private organizations. The generic support, and we were talking about the state's human service system, public transport, other agencies and services to which everyone has access. And then the specialized supports, such as disability services, such as special early intervention, and vocational. So, supports that are needed, support areas associated with school age students. We are looking at like home living, which are activities that pertain to an individual's care. The supports could be such as in home care or like life skill curriculum, supplementing extra support there. We have community and neighborhood. These are activities that relate to participating in a community activity. These includes the possibility of uh, clubs and sports for the youth with intellectual disabilities outside of the school. Then we have school participation. These are activities that involve being an active member of the class and school activities. This could be specific supports, co-teaching with special education or having teaching assistants. Then we have supports in school learning. These activities focus on being successful with school tasks and assignments. Also, like before, co-teaching with special ed and having teaching assistants is great. You could also supplement it with organizational supports and helping with scheduling assistance. So the next is health and safety. Activities pertaining to maintaining health habits and keeping oneself safe. This is ideas of hygiene education and routine supports. And then also supports for when they're out and about, knowing who to call when what happens, and having those kind of supports in place for them. So the next is social activities that involve skills associated with interacting with others in various settings. This includes school-supported clubs and sports for youth with intellectual disabilities. And then finally, we have advocacy. These activities focus on self advocacy. These activities should focus on informing the students of their rights and further protecting them through the implementation and use of things such as IEPs and 504. Next, actually, we will be discussing the use of assistive technology and the benefits that they bring to your child's education. So there are two types in particular I wish to talk about, and these are cognitive aids, which are employed to assist people lacking in memory retention, attention, and thinking skills. Time management tools, graphic organizers, activity planners, and reminders are popular examples of these cognitive aids. The next type is communication aids. Audiobooks, communication cards, etc., can help uh, enable communication in an augmented manner and sometimes as an alternative to speech. Further aids could include math manipulatives such as shape cutouts, blocks, symbolic representations of numbers, meaning like coins, chips, or tokens, and also the use of reading. Assistive technology helps in teaching word association to objects, so it's good to have um, those sort of assistive technology when you want to build up a mental association so that uh, the child can have a better retention and then express what they need more efficiently. So now that we have a better understanding of ways to help children with intellectual disabilities, let us revisit the questions you all proposed at the beginning of the term. Question 1. So this was proposed by Gabby and then supplemented by Noel. But it is, what are some examples of intellectual disabilities? And then how do these disabilities overlap with other disability categories if they do? So some different examples of intellectual disabilities include fetal alcohol syndrome. It is one of the most common reasons for the diagnosis of intellectual disabilities. Children who are diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder are known to have many issues, including delayed speech and language acquisition and cognition. Students develop fetal alcohol spectrum disorder when their mothers drink heavily when they're pregnant. The next one is Fragile X syndrome. It is the most commonly known inherited type of intellectual disability. This gene mutation affects the X chromosome and is more prevalent in males than females. And children who have this diagnosis have learning delays, hyperactivity, sensitivity to touch and sound, and aggressive outbursts. And interestingly enough, male children with Fragile X syndrome actually have a 46% chance of also having a comorbidity of autism. I thought that was very interesting. Females only have a 16% probability of having a comorbidity. So the next one is deletion syndrome. This is considered to be an intellectual disability. It doesn't have much public awareness as compared to the others. And it's basically it's a result of a small deletion of DNA on chromosome 22. For all you science fans out there who know what that means. And it manifests in significant intellectual impairment and delays in development. And then finally, we have Down syndrome, which is another example of a chromosomal abnormality. And the degrees of cognitive difficulty an individual has varies, usually ranging between mild and moderate. Yeah. And then while ADHD, addressing Noel's question, while ADHD and autism are often assumed to be intellectual disabilities, they are not. Though they could represent a comorbidity with any of the above. And then also traumatic brain injuries can also cause intellectual disabilities. So the next question is what teaching strategies can teachers use with students that have intellectual disabilities? And so this is pretty simple, straightforward answer. I just wanted to say be as concise as possible. So an effective teaching method is to demonstrate what you mean in addition to giving verbal direction. With new information shared verbally, also show a picture. And then instead of just showing a picture, provide the student with hands-on material and experience and the opportunity to try things out. Further, go step by step. Break down learning tasks into small steps. Each learning task is introduced one step at a time, and this avoids overwhelming the student. Further, provide immediate feedback. So immediately providing feedbacks helps the student make a connection between their answers, behaviors, or questions with the information that you are presenting as the teacher. And then be hands-on. That means using all your senses to learn, and this helps to retain information better. And then most importantly is to utilize accommodations and modifications frequently. Those will be some of the most important things for you to give your children assistance. So then we're moving forward to the third question. We have, what are some modifications for students with intellectual disabilities, presented by Andre. And modifications are different than accommodations, which we all know. So these modifications change the structure of your class. So the first one I wanted to touch on is a teacher to student ratio. Um, when you have a lot of students with a lot of needs, it stretches the teacher too thin to give adequate support to each student. That's why co-teaching or having teaching assistants that specialize in these specific areas are very important to reduce to more balance to balance better the teacher to student ratio. So some modified instructional strategies that you can use functional activities. These activities relate to real-world applications that teach a needed skill, such as like cooking or finding your way to a friend's house or to the store in town. You know, repetition of concepts. So this idea needs to be utilized in multiple aspects, making sure that you really get the tie-in and make sure that they understand it thoroughly. So repeat this in multiple different categories in English and math and science, in art and music, you know, hands-on learning activities. So it's really helpful to make sure that a lot of your activities involve physically doing something or being hands-on in the learning engagement. And then chaining large activities. So chaining large activities means breaking them up into smaller activities that lead into the next one. So instead of one big activity, you have multiple smaller activities that gradually lead into the next idea and the next idea and the next idea. So the next one would be scheduling class. So like scheduling class time, you must have like short activity times that alternate between like physical and sitting down activities. Schedule should also try and incorporate some aspects of like self-care so that the child starts to become more independent. So like putting on shoes, going to the toilet, feeding themselves. It should all be an aspect in which you are scheduling into your class. And then finally, well, personal safety measures. So you should definitely make sure that your classroom is safe. So that means sharp scissors and knives are kept out of reach. Harmful liquids are also put away. Medicines, you can't find them, unless you're an authority figure that knows how to use them. So this also makes sure that none of the children can lock themselves away in any of the rooms, like when you have like private space or like other areas in which they can go for the quiet time. Make sure that there's no way that they can get locked in there. And then small beads or toys that the children can put in their mouths. Uh, be aware if a child has a tendency to do that, because uh, when you're using smaller manipulatives for teaching concepts in the classroom, that could be a safety hazard, especially if the child has a tendency. So, and then finally, the last question is, what are the different ways they test for intellectual disabilities, and how do teaching plans have to change for each student? So as we discussed, they test for intellectual disabilities using IQ tests, the result of which will be below 70 or below. And then they also test for adaptive behavior skills. And ways to adjust your teaching plan uh, is the use of modifications and accommodations. And then review your lesson plans with IEPs in mind. And remember that when you're developing your lesson plan, you should develop your lesson plan with uh, object, the object of the plan to be getting as many students through the ideas to the subject mastery as possible, which means remember to remove as many blocks as possible. And then, as I wind down this presentation, I thought that leaving you with some literature related to the intellectual disabilities, which we already discussed in class, So feel free to pause the video, copy down the links, or go to the slide page and click them. And then finally, I thought it would be wise to give you some first-hand accounts of living with an intellectual disability.
For me, a learning disability means that people will people will find it hard to be able to learn things first time, and they need time. They need time to understand things.
They might need care and support as well by their parents, by their mum and dad, or brother and sister, or their family carers.
Learning disability is a lifelong condition, but I've got a learning disability, but it does not mean that we cannot work just as well as anybody else. Sometimes we can do the job even better.
I actually didn't know what it was till 93. It's just sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes people are impatient.
People with a learning disability, we are like awesome people that like to mix. People with a learning disability can do it.
And here are my resources for my presentation, along with some extra resources if you'd like any further information into the subject of intellectual disabilities. I thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope that it was informative in giving you what you need in understanding intellectual disabilities and how to help your students in the future in the classroom. Thank you.